go. All right. Good. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last day of the Tech Summit here. This is one of the last, I think there might be one session after this. But happy Friday. You've made it this far. It's a little bit rainy and a foggy day, but we'll get through it. This is deploying Microsoft Office 365 clients using System Center Configuration Manager. You'll hear some acronyms used, so Office 365, O365, ProPlus. For Config Manager, I'll be using Config Man, Config Manager, CM. Sometimes you'll see abbreviation for CM. I'll do my best to make sure I enunciate it every time. My name is John Gruszek. I'm a deployment consultant within Microsoft Services, working with Office 365 and specifically working with Office 365 ProPlus. I'm a part of the Office 365 ProPlus Lighthouse team, which works here with Chris and Brian in getting Office 365 deployed, enabled, working with the engineering team and product group, also getting the preferred practices out there, which we'll cover at the end of this session. So been a SMEing about it for about 2.5 years. It's been everything that I live and breathe. So we'll go ahead and talk about how best to get it deployed if you're using Config Manager. This is a 200-level session, so I'll try and keep it about 200. We will go into some deep dive discussions if needed. I'll try and leave some plenty of time for some questions. I will ask that if you have a question pertaining to the specific slide, go ahead and answer it. But if you have more of an open-ended question about a situation that you have, if it's not really relating to what's on the slide, let's try and hold that until afterwards so we don't derail the conversation too much. But again, if it's something on the slide that you want to specifically ask a question about, just go ahead and pop your hand up and I'll be glad to answer it. So a quick agenda, we'll go over a deployment overview, better together, the story of Config Manager in Office 365 ProPlus, configuring and deploying Office 365 ProPlus. We'll get into some updates management on how to best manage your updates with Config Man, and then we'll look at the integration roadmap on what to expect with Configuration Manager and ProPlus and Office 365 clients in the future. So Office 365 ProPlus preferred practices deployment scenarios. So if you were in the Deploy Office the Right Way, Deploy Office 2016 the Right Way yesterday with these two gentlemen, you saw some of these slides with the deployment scenarios. I'll give you a quick recap of what they are if this is your first time seeing this. It's three scenarios that we defined as working with the product group, engineering, deployment consultants with ProPlus as part of the Lighthouse team. We identified three scenarios that most customers will align at least somewhat with. Whether you're cloud managed and using the cloud and CDN to do all of your updates, locally managed, which would be like network shares or different type of file distribution. Lastly, enterprise managed, which will be the focus of today, which is using some type of software distribution tool and specifically Config Man. So you'll see here we have the Office CDN, file share and DFS, and we'll be focusing on this third one here, enterprise managed, which will be leveraging a management tool. So these were your typical managed deployment steps. When Office 365 ProPlus was first released, it was with the 2013 application set. Updates were still just one monthly update every Patch Tuesday. And these were the typical steps we found ourselves going through with every customer on how best to deploy it. So you need to download the Office Deployment Tool, or the ODT, which is a setup engine needed in order to download the files and execute or perform the actual installation and source files. You have to customize the XML file or files to download your source files. So you want to be downloading, in these, again, we won't get too detailed. They're going to include your application sets, your languages, exclusions, your bitness or architecture, where you want updates for. And depending on how big your organization is and what type of global impact you have, you might have anywhere from 10, 15, 20 XML files that you're managing. Next, you need to download your source files using these XML files and also the Office Deployment Tool. You move to step 4, where you customize your XML files to install ProPlus. So these are going to be slightly different than your download ones because it's going to include your update properties. You'd have to create and customize your deployment packages, again, for each different type of distribution that you want to use. You're going to install 365 ProPlus using Office Deployment Tool. And then lastly, your deployment is going to be continually managed with your management and updates. So if you need to add applications back in, if you just want to remove an application, or a big common one is, if someone wants to add on Project or Visio, and then of course, ongoing updates. The question I always got as a deployment consultant was, can't this be automated? Well, of course, you can come out with scripts that do all sorts of things like this that would be able to go and pull down the Office Deployment Tool. And then you still need to customize the XML files yourself, but you could use automation to always go and check if there's a new build available. It will pull it down, move it to this folder, move the current one into the previous folder, all that types of fun stuff that Automation is nice, but it'd be nice if it was built natively into the product, or there's another product that you could leverage and have that better together story. And hint, that's what Config Manager and ProPlus will do. So Config Manager creates automated solutions for downloading multiple channels and languages, which if you're unfamiliar, the 2016 application suite of Office 365 ProPlus, which is what the current version out is, contains multiple update channels. We won't get into that on this in this session. Hopefully you're aware of what they are. If not, you can definitely watch Brian and Chris's session and get a recap of what the different channels are and how best to manage those. Create and update the Config Manager package. Then we're going to have an automated solution for updates, switching channels, and rollback. So again, these aren't fully necessarily just one-click solutions, but there's automation where you're not having to go and do administrative effort of copy and pasting things over. And lastly, distributing and deploying content, which if you're using Config Manager, you know that it's automated to distribute and deploy all types of different content and updates. So what the majority of the session today is really going to focus on Config Manager vNext, or which was Config Manager 1511, which has been rolled up into 1602, 1606, and now the most current version is 1610. So if you're someone out there that is on Config Manager 2012 R2, I will talk about some of the things in this deck. I'll be honest, it's mostly tailored to Config Manager 1602, 1606, etc. So you will find things and bits and parts that are interesting. Hopefully, if you're here in this session, you are interested in the next version of Config Manager, because as you'll see through this session, there's a lot of great features as far as how to use it and leverage it to actually automate ProPlus, to where you're not having to hit that green button every time you want to deploy. You're more of that red button where you have a full process going, everything's going well. You only have to worry about stopping the process if something goes wrong, which we don't expect to, but we all know in IT scenarios, Murphy's Law, if it can go wrong, it most likely will. So Config Manager 1602 or newer, that's when we really first released the first integration with Office 365 clients. So you'll see some of the things here: full support of handling click-to-run releases, integration into software update management workflow, which is a big one, having updates now come through System Center Configuration Manager instead of having to go out directly to the CDN and download them themselves. Office 365 client update management, so Config Manager actually being able to manage your desktop clients out there. Centralized Office 365 client management dashboard, so getting inventory and reporting that actually allows you to make actionable insights and decisions based off of the data that you have out there. Continued new features in the roadmap, which we'll cover at the end. And each of these we will cover throughout this session. But the continued new features, so things that we're working on that we're communicating out to the public that, hey, this is what you can expect, and maybe that is in technical preview right now. It might not be coming the next build of Config Manager, but it's on the roadmap for ProPlus, or specifically Office 365 clients and Config Manager vNext integration. So if you're using Config Manager 2012 R2, or you're using an older version, which hopefully not too many people are, or using a third-party tool like Altiris is a big one that I know quite a few customers have, you'll see these things are kind of what you've been used to. Updates must be downloaded from the CDN via the Office deployment tool. So every time a new build is released, you're going to have to go and run the setup.exe, pull down the new version, and replicate out your source files wherever they need to be replicated to. Newer builds are treated as applications and packages, so every time you have a new build that's out there, you need to go ahead and package it up, distribute it out to your distribution point. So there's a bit of administrative effort there, because not only do you have to go and manually download it, if you're using network shares or if you're using your distribution points, you're going to have to go and create that package or update the content of the package and deploy it out. You have to add logic to handle certain scenarios. So we won't get into what all the complex scenarios will look like, but I can promise you as a deployment consultant and being across plenty of customers, we have had to add logic to make sure that they get the correct installation. You might want them to be running uninstallations of different products, things like that. So when you're using Config Man 2012 R2, you'll see that if you really want automation with it, you're going to have to use scripts as well as Config Man. And that's where the benefit of having 1602 and newer eliminates that need for scripts, and it's built into Config Man. So an enterprise managed deployment. This again is going to look like a familiar slide if you saw the session yesterday. So the initial deployment, we'll walk through this pretty quickly. So you're going to download the ODT from the Microsoft Download Center. You're going to download your source files from the Office CDN. If you want to have the control build, you can also have users install from the CDN. We'll build your Config Man package using your Office deployment tool, your source files, and your configuration XML file as normal. You're going to push your package to your distribution points. and then you'd have the run package install. So this is nothing really new from what you did with 2012 R2 or what was done in the past. But what is the nice feature is you have this asterisk that coming soon, which is currently in technical preview, and it was in ConfigMan 16.11 technical preview, is actually an automated Office 365 client deployment wizard. As to when that's going to go public, it's still being tested and worked out, so I wouldn't expect it even to see it in what will be 17.02, which will be the February release. It's still being worked on it, but you can play with it in technical preview. It has the Office deployment tool, the ability to create customized XML files, and your source files all baked natively into ConfigMan. So you don't even have to worry about going out there and downloading the deployment tool, having to run it manually through command lines every time. It's all going to be done, and your customizations can all be done through an easy wizard, which we'll cover at the end here. But it is a solution that's going to be fully in ConfigMan now, not having to balance multiple things. When we get into updates here, you look at your traditional option 1 here, which will be Office publishes a new update to the CDN. Your client's going to go out to the CDN and check if there's a newer version available. If there is, it's going to download it and update itself. Option 2 is if you have ConfigMan 2012 R2 here. So Office publishes a new update to the CDN. You're going to have to download the source files for all applicable channels and populate those out to your either your distribution points or your network shares. And again, this is a manual administrative process. You're going to create your packages and actually push them to your local distribution points, push the advertisement to the clients, or let them naturally hit that scheduled task to see if there's an update available, and then they find the update. But now let's look at option 2 for Config Manager 1606 Plus. Office publishes a new update to the CDN. Use Config Manager software update feature to actually just download and configure the updates within Config Manager itself. Push your updates to the local distribution point. Again, you're not even leaving Configuration Manager right now. Push the updated advertisement or let the natural scheduled task run, and your clients will update. So the nice part and the distinct differences between those two is that you're not having to do that manual process of running the setup.exe, download, and getting those source files. If you're managing 3 channels, which I hope most of you are, or at least 2, you're going to have to download each of those builds every time they're released, whether it's Patch Tuesday or if you're using current channels released more frequently. You got to download those, package them in, making sure that you have your packages updated. If you're using network shares, you got to make sure that you put the right source files in the right location. So there's a lot of detail that you really have to pay attention to. And as an IT admin or pro, or if you're managing your clients, you have to be careful with this because you don't want to accidentally put the wrong build in the wrong folder. Someone might try and install or update or fail. Or worse off, you might actually put someone on the wrong channel, and then all of a sudden they're confused because they're seeing features they've never seen before. So it is a very careful management perspective if you're doing this all on premises from a locally managed scenario. Not that we don't recommend it, it's just you do have to be very careful, and it's going to have a little bit more administrative effort. And what we want to focus on is how to automate that and keep you within one application itself, which is ConfigMan, not having to bounce back and forth from a desktop, from a command line or command prompt to ConfigMan, and then you have to go and package and open up Notepad to make new XMLs and all that. So the Better Together story, Office 365 ProPlus and Configuration Manager 1602. The first thing is it allows you to deploy Office on your own terms. So you're able to configure and deliver Office applications across your environment. So it includes all Office 365 applications, which would be Office 365 ProPlus, the Office 365 Project, and Office 365 Visio, which all run on the click-to-run installation technology. You're able to advertise optional packages and applications. So what you can do is if you want to make it a mandatory install, if you want to make it a optional install, depending on what your leadership decides. And this is something that is available in ConfigMan 2012 R2 as well. But when we get into these next two is really where ConfigMan 1602 Plus stands out. So the orchestrated updates, integration into software updates workflow, which was released in Config Manager 1602. So most people out here, if you're managing ConfigMan for your updates, you'll get your Windows updates through ConfigMan. Let's say you have Office 2010, you'll get those through there. You might have some type of biz servers or other things that you're pulling all of your updates through ConfigMan through the software updates workflow. But you might have noticed, wow, how come Office 365 clients aren't an option there? Well, now they were. It's released in 1602. So when you go and look in there, you actually select that products menu of where you're able to choose what products you want to sync updates for. You'll now see in there, once you're on the latest update and you want to make sure all your ports are working correctly, which if you're doing other updates, they are, you'll see in there, once you're on 1602 Plus and it's had time to communicate with the server, you'll see Office 365 listed there as an option as products, which will again include ProPlus, Visio, and Project. Also, was released with 1606 are two features, and I have a typo there, my apology with that underscore. It integrates with your automatic deployment rules that you've used forever with your other applications. The really cool one is in 1606 is being able to manage Office 365 client updates, which kind of sounds familiar with, or it might sound similar to integration with software updates workflow. What 1606 allowed you to do with this is it's able to manage the desktop client itself. So previously, you were able to just, with 1602, updates were released. You'd be able to download it in your software management workflow. You can distribute it to your distribution point. But from that point, you're still relying on the client itself, on that scheduled task, to go and communicate and go and look to that distribution point. Now you're actually able to communicate directly from Config Manager with the Office 365 clients on the desktops. And again, we'll cover that into the next couple slides here and more on what some of the features and capabilities are there. The next one here is actionable insights. So available inventory and reports via the Office 365 centralized client dashboard. I'll show you what that looks like and some of the things you can use it for. That was just released in Config Manager 16.10, so some of you that are on it, you've seen that get populated. And the cool part with 16.10 as well is that Office 365 actually has its own label now. So previously, when you had to download the updates, you'd go into software updates workflow, and you see all your updates. There's actually a specific category now for Office 365 clients. So you can click that. That's where the dashboard is, and it has another drop-down tree under it. You focus there, expand that out, and it's going to list all your products or your updates there. So you can just focus solely on Office 365 updates there. You don't have to worry about the thousands of updates that populate your software updates workflow. Any questions on this initially? All right, cool. So the centralized management. So this is what the client management dashboard looks like. So I'm all the way on this side, and I don't want to walk all the way down there and have to jump back up. But you'll see on that top left-hand corner, you have a count of the clients out there, and this was in my lab, so it's obviously much on a smaller scale. But you'll see we have 5 clients out there, and also to list the languages that you have available, and I will have a blow-up of this picture as well. And you're going to have the versions that are out there. So just some actionable insight that you can see, okay, what's out there, what languages are people using, things like that. But we'll start with the top here. So access reports. So what displays your client count, versions, channels, and languages, which you're able to better manage clients. So maybe you think that, let's say you made both FRDC and deferred channel available in the software, or in the catalog, and you left it up to people to install either one. Or maybe let's even say current channel and deferred channel. You left it up to them to install. Well, you can use this and see, okay, how many people went for current channel and how many people went for deferred channel. And if you notice that everyone went for current channel, or maybe everyone went for deferred channel, you can use that and take back to your leadership. Hey, okay, everyone's starting to use current channel. Maybe we should start to focus on if this is our only channel for us, because when we talked with Microsoft, they recommended having a breakdown of all 3 channels. So what you're able to do is just see what your clients and your users are actually doing compared to what you might have intended them to do. If you have a mandatory install, you just get the actual inventory on how many people have installed it. So you're still able to use that data to see, okay, are we on schedule with what our deployment goals were? What versions are out there? Are there people that haven't updated for some reason? You might have languages as an optional install and see how many people are actually installing those languages. So even if you have a mandatory push, there's still very good data that you can grab from this. So create automatic deployment rules. Publish your updates using your familiar ADRs or automatic deployment rules that you've done in the past, so you don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. That's the nice part, is we integrated it with Office 365 clients. And the client update process is all fully automated as you'd expect. The last one here is coming new, is what I talked about as the deployment wizard. So this is coming soon to Config Manager. Again, it's in technical preview and is in testing. It does have a little bit of bugs that I've played around with. So if you're in technical preview and you're playing around with it, it is in technical preview for a reason. So there are some glitches and bugs. But if you do have a technical preview server available that you have installed on and you want to go and play around with it, I definitely recommend seeing what it's like through the wizard, because I'll cover it here, but it's always good to be able to get your hands on something yourself. So what it does is it allows you to configure any Office 365 client products to be installed through an easy-to-do UI wizard. So instead of having to do the config XML files, you get a nice config man wizard that you're used to doing, whether it's when you build out a package or even just installing config manager. You're used to going through their gray boxed next. It's the same sense. So you're familiar with what you're doing in the wizard, and you actually configure settings and properties for Office 365 clients. And you'll get to see this towards the end of the slides here when I actually go through what the wizard looks like in each step. But that's not, that's including what version you want, what channel you want, what application exclusions you want, whether you want to include project and Visio, whether those project and Visio are volume licensed or Office 365 licensed. So it literally covers every scenario that you could think of that you used to have to do manual processes of on your desktop client. Now you can all do it in Config Man. So here's a closer screenshot. So what I was talking about originally was this Office 365 label over here on the left-hand side, this folder structure. So if you dropped it down, it would have all of your updates. It would have Office 365 updates underneath that tree. You click on that, and in this pane, it would populate all the updates that are available. This is just your general dashboard that you'd see. So again, it lists your clients out. You have the versions, which you would have multiple versions out there because you have multiple channels. You have your Office 365 client languages. So again, you can see how many people are actually choosing to install optional languages. So with the one thing I really like with the languages, a lot of people might think, well, what's the point of that? And most of the time I know what people are installing. If your package size is 15 gigs because you're including every single language out there, and you realize on this that only 3 languages are being used, you can probably downsize your package size. So it's going to make, when you're distributing that out to your distribution points, you can cut down on sizing there. So there are things that you can use from this to actually make good data insights and good decisions on how your deployment is going, because it's an ongoing process, right? You're going to see users maybe want to switch channels. Users might not be downloading the languages that you want. You might see users not updating as quickly as you want and on a prior version, so you got to figure out, okay, we need to start enforcing updates. So there is, as plain as this might look, there is a ton of data that you can gather from this, and you can make very good decisions on how better to manage your Office, not only after your first deployment or even a pilot deployment, but continually ongoing. So then this is what is available in the technical preview. You see this new box here added to the right, and it's Office 365 installer. So again, this isn't technical preview, but when you click that, it would launch this the wizard that you're able to go through and set all those properties and be able to do everything through Config Man and not do it through manual processes on your desktop. So deploying Office 365 clients using Configuration Manager. So this is what's in technical preview, and this is what we're going to spend a little bit of time on. I know it's still in technical preview right now, so you're not able to actually go out there and use it for production environments, but it is coming, so it's something that I do want to focus on and talk about on how best to use it. So you can go back to your communication teams, your leadership teams, your managers, and say, okay, this is what I learned at the Chicago Tech Summit. This is coming as part of soon of Office 365 ProPlus. So you can then adapt. Maybe you're thinking about deploying and you have a targeted timeline of, let's say, June of this year. You could say, okay, well, I think there's a decent chance that that could be released by June. So we can kind of look and get more information on that. Maybe you say, okay, we are just about to deploy and this isn't going to be ready. So let's just go ahead and deploy as we thought, and then we can look to utilize this feature in the near future. So what it does is it replaces the need for the Office deployment tool. It doesn't actually replace the need for it as much as it replaces the need for you going out there and having to manually download the Office deployment tool itself and run the command lines from the command prompt. It allows admins to choose configurable options such as products, exclude applications, languages, versions. You'll see here as we go through the slides, there's Visio and project on there. You could select a license type, so if it's volume licensed. And most importantly, it automatically enables clients to be managed by Config Manager. So if you are on 1602 or 1606 and you want to use Config Manager to manage your updates and your clients, you might have seen if you're using it, or if you don't know, I'm about to give you a little bit of insight. You have to actually enable the COM object for the Office 365 clients. So what the COM object is it just receives communications from Config Manager directly and receives instructions pretty much. So what you do is you just need to enable it on the client, and you can either do that through GPO or XML right now through the XML file, and you just set it to enabled, and what that does is it allows it to be managed by Config Man. So once you set those to enable and you're on Config Manager 1606, you're going to download the newest update, you're going to distribute it out to your distribution point, and then Config Manager is able to talk with your or Office 365 clients and say, okay, there's a new update available at this distribution point, go get it. Previously, you didn't have that ability to have Config Manager communicate directly with your clients. It would rely on scheduled tasks, or as some of you might be familiar with in here that I had to do with plenty of customers, is you'd actually manually call the Office update command, which is Office C2R client.exe. We had customers that would manually call that because they wanted more control. So they didn't feel like they had enough control over when updates were kicked off. So they would actually manually call the command to update, where now you can actually do that all through Config Manager. And lastly, it uses your local software. We'll actually get into the components here before we get into the slideshow of what the wizard looks like. But these are going to be your minimum requirements as far as getting some of the benefits out of using the better together strategy here. So the Config Manager minimum version of 1602. 1602 was the first build that allowed you to have the integration with software updates workflow. So if you're still on 1511, you'll see that you can't actually download the product updates through Config Man. You'll have to upgrade to 1602. So that's kind of the baseline where you see a lot of this stuff. The baseline is 1602. 1606 had a lot more enticing features. 1610 is getting better. So you see that each build, we're actually compiling new features and new benefits of upgrading. So if you are in an organization that's stuck on 1602, you can take some of this info back and say, okay, I know we don't want to go to 1606 yet, but there's some really great benefits that we can receive from going to 1606. So you need to be on a supported Office 365 client channel version. As long as you're not on a channel version that's about 6 or 8 months older, you'll technically be able to have the support to manage it. But the most importantly, you need to be on a secure and supported build of Office 365, either ProPlus or Project or Visio. And you can find those on the release logs and make sure that you're on a version that was released within time. There's actually specific requirements that will say the exact minimum build version that you need for, let's say, current channel. But the thing is if you're on current channel, you know that you need to update every month. Otherwise, your latest build is out of date. So saying that current channel build 16.1.2 isn't technically the minimum requirement because it is an out-of-support build. The big one that I like to point out is WSUS minimum version 4.0, so Windows Server Update Services. You do need to be on 4.0. It is not that is a very hard requirement. So it's not like you can be on 3.0 and try and configure and do some maneuvering and things like that. You do need to be on a minimum of 4.0. So I do have a couple customers that have talked about they are on 3.0. So it's something, again, you could take this back to your leadership teams and say, okay, we're on 3.0. We've been looking for a reason to upgrade. Here's a big reason why. And lastly, I mentioned this Office COM object being enabled. So again, it receives the commands from Config Manager. It's configurable through ODT, or the Office Deployment Tool Configuration XML, GPO, or in technical preview right now with the wizard, you can actually configure it through Config Manager itself. So the Config Manager update process. So this is actually going to explain what it looks like and the role that WSUS actually plays, because if you've had a Microsoft deployment consultant on site for ProPlus or been in some of the sessions and things like that, one of the most common questions we ever got when ProPlus first launched was, does it leverage WSUS? And it doesn't. It updates not with your normal Windows updates. It updates separately, and that was something people had to get used to. It was a little bit different, but the update cadence is working very well. But then you'll get a little bit confused because you're in this session and you say, John, you said it never uses WSUS. I see WSUS all over this presentation. Well, it does, but I'll explain to what very limited interaction it actually has with WSUS and why it's actually required. But do know it's still using the typical Office 365 update process. There was a bit of a requirement that we had with the WSUS and Config Manager teams that we had to produce a small empty package in WSUS to make it work. So the first step here is the Office update is going to be published through the WSUS. So it's going to get released in your software integration workflow. So you would identify what builds you need to update. So if you're using all 3 channels, let's say Patch Tuesday rolls around and you see that FRDC and DC was released, you go to your software updates integration workflow, see they're on there, right-click, and you can get them downloaded and get them stored. 2, Config Manager is going to identify your applicable desktops it can apply the update to. Config Manager in step 3 is then going to refer to the Office CDN for the file list and downloads and distributes the required files in order to create the updated image. Finally, step 4, config manager is going to contact those desktops, since now in 1606 they can communicate, using distribution points as a source path. So what you're going to do is when the update gets published, you're going to download it, and then eventually when you're ready for client's update to it, you're going to deploy it to your distribution point. Config man is going to talk to your clients and say, okay, we published that new update out there to the distribution point, go and grab it. Excuse me. So that's what the last step is there, is config manager is going to talk to them via that COM object and say, okay, updates are out there, go get them. You can even set some maintenance windows and schedules on that. We won't dive into all those. So you do know you can have, do know that you can have a little bit more control over when updates are going out, but you do have the ability with config man to talk to those clients and have that control. So WSUS package contents and naming. So this is where I was talking about. A lot of people would come at me and say, you said it doesn't use WSUS, but clearly you have WSUS listed right there. So what's the deal there? All it actually contains is that noop.exe package, which is required by WSUS, but it actually doesn't have any code. So when config manager team, the config man team was getting together with WSUS and figuring out how this was all going to work on the back end and the engineering side, they realized as much as we said it doesn't use WSUS, we do need to have an exe package in there, and while it doesn't have any code actually, it is required to be in there. So that's why you'll see it, but it's still using that traditional Office 365 update methods that you've been used to with as far back as 2013 ProPlus. So you can also do supersedence information, so you can update previous deployment types or upgrade and install previous applications. For those of you that are managing config manager or using config manager right now to manage applications, you've seen supersedence information in most of your updates or other applications that you update. It works the same way. You have your eligibility rules. So it's going to check that it must have the COM interface object enabled, which we talked about. Must be in the correct package channel and a lower version number than the package version. So that sounds like a lot, but all it really is saying is that it needs to be on a lower version, which makes sense. You can't update to something that's the same version. So it's got to be able to check and see, okay, there is a newer version out there to update to. And you got to make sure that you're in the correct channel package. And all that is really saying is that when your client goes to update, it just needs to make sure that if you're using some type of local source and you're using like a file structure or a folder structure, and you have that update path pointing to a specific folder, you need to make sure that it's pointing to the folder of the correct channel. Otherwise, Brian talked about in his session yesterday, if it's not, you will change to that new channel, whatever it is. And it will be a file replication size that could range anywhere from a couple hundred megs to what would potentially be a full reinstall. And while you're actually doing a reinstall, on the back end, it needs to change on how it's going to get its update cadence. So if you do switch channels and you're going from like the most current channel to the last supported deferred channel, you could see a full file replication of about over a gig or 1.2 gigs. So it is important if you're going to manage it locally and have a folder structure breakdown, or you're going to do anything like that with config man, make sure you're detailed and you do your planning that your update path for your current channel people are only pointing to that folder that contains current channel builds, etc. So right now, this is what you'll see when you go into config manager software updates, the integration. You'll see updates with these labels under sample here. The breakdown is Office 365 client update, and it'll say either 32 or 64-bit. It will give you the year, month, which is the new versioning of Office ProPlus. We announced that about 4 or 5 months ago, the new versioning. So you'll see, for instance, 1602 would be February of 2016, which is consistent with most of the Microsoft versioning that you see out there. So a couple samples that you see here. One might be Office 365 Client Update 32-bit, 1605, first release for a deferred channel. So it lets you know what channel name it is as well, so you can download the applicable update. And then just an example I have here is what you might actually be downloading all 4 of these. In this situation, you would have your validation channel for first release for deferred channel. You would have your Office 365 client update for current channel. And then you might be downloading 2 deferred channels depending on your environment. In this case, I have a 32-bit, and let's say our finance team needed 64-bit. So every release of updates, it would be totally possible, and I have customers that do this. These are like these are the 4 updates that they commonly download for their software integration each time there's a release. Now again, FRDC and DC release on Patch Tuesday. Current channel is more quality driven, so it's released at different intervals. So most of the time you could have kind of a standard process on Patch Tuesday to go out there and check for FRDC and deferred channel, get those downloaded, and then every couple of days, depending on what your software sync schedule is, you'll see that current channel get released and you download it as well. I believe there is changing, and I'll wait for Brian to confirm this with me. I believe we are changing the actual context of what the client update looks like to be more in line with the version number as well. Yeah, I'll have to. I don't know when it would be released because it was first talked about at Microsoft Ignite back in September, but it's going to be more in line. Instead of just the 1602, it will be like the 1602 and then the 8-digit version number, because we did get some feedback that you have to go and actually find what version number it really correlates to, so do look for that in the future. Yes?
Is it smart enough not to download 4 versions of Office that are all the same? You know, just do the deltas. So current branch would have the most, and then the other one may just have some DLLs added at the back, or does it download all of it 4 times?
Okay, so the question was, does it download just the Delta files, or does it download the full build? So you're talking about when you actually download it through ConfigMan, it's going to download the whole package, because what you need to do is each time, it's a new build version. So the easiest way to think of it is when you look at all the apps on your phone. Each time you install an app, you're installing a specific build version. And when you update to a new version, and apps are smart enough to do the Delta file. But it works the same way. So if you're going to go ahead and deploy it out, you're going to have to deploy that whole package. So that's where if you have, my example earlier, if you have every single language and your size is like 10 gigs, you're going to have to plan to deploy that package of 10 gigs out to your distribution points every month. And that's where that congestion can happen. You got to make sure your pipeline there is good, because your clients will do the Delta replication and try and do as long as you're on an N-1 build, it'll try and do the least differential. And like you said, it'll do just what it needs. But when you're actually pushing it out to the distribution point, it's got to be the full new build. That was a good question, though. Any other questions? Yes? So the question was, can you point some clients to download through the CDN and some clients to download from Config Manager? Yes. You can either configure that through a GPO or the config XML. I would recommend doing GPOs if your organization uses them, because they take precedence and you could always change them pretty quickly and do a GP update on clients. But what we actually see, and what's pretty common, is customers and organizations will deploy with Config Manager, and even if they have the newest version, they might just have all their clients go out to the CDN directly. Or a more common even scenario would be your Salesforce goes to the CDN, because you never know when they're going to come back on site and when they're going to be able to hit a distribution point. And their distribution point, their closest one might be, for example, we're in Chicago now, the closest one might be in Seattle. Well, you don't really want them going back all the way to Seattle. Let's say they're traveling internationally. You don't want them having to go all the way back to Seattle. So we do see common scenarios where it's segmented, that you have some users go to the CDN, some users get natively through Config Manager, and we've even seen customers that started with managing it through ConfigMan and eventually went to the CDN once they verified that their network can handle it. So it's kind of all depending on what your leadership team, what you work with your IT department on, and what you want to do. But I would definitely play around with it. You can even do some network traces and see what type of bandwidth you're consuming and what's going to work best for you, because you can definitely segment it out to half and half, 1/3, 2/3. There's no best way really to do it and other than what works best for your organization as far as network is concerned. Any other questions so far? All right. So configuring and deploying Office 365 ProPlus. So this, as much as that demo slide is nice, this is actually a live PowerPoint slide demo. Just because there were a couple bugs in the technical preview, and I didn't want to be doing a live demo here and then have it not working, and then you guys are all excited to see something new, and it fails. So I went ahead and just did screenshots. It explains the same things. I'll make sure to detail every step of the way. So again, this is where you see when you first launch Config Manager. This is 1606. So you'll see here we have our Office 365 Client Management folder there. Underneath it is that Office 365 Updates. That's where all your updates, when they're synced, will be stored. Or where you actually see them. I shouldn't say stored, because unless you download them. You see your client management dashboard here. We've seen this earlier, and this is actually the technical preview version, because you'll see over in that right-hand corner, we have that Office 365 installer there. So now we're going to get into the wizard, which I talked about for deploying ProPlus. It's in technical preview right now. So this is where a lot of people will be pretty excited about to get to see what these steps look like and see all that you're able to do as far as integration and automation goes. So when you first click on that Office 365 installer, the plus button, it'll bring up this wizard here. So it's called the Office 365 Client Installation Wizard. You'll get your application settings here, so you can provide a name. So for this example, I did the IT department. A quick description, you don't have to do it, but sometimes we like to be thorough. So Office 365 ProPlus deployment for the IT team. And I even went in there and specified what channel it is. The cool thing is the content. So you can actually, if you already have content downloaded, you can look to leverage that. If you don't, cool, you can just get it straight from the CDN itself. But this allows you, if you already have content or XMLs created, you can leverage those already. If you just want to use the wizard for everything, you can do that as well. So we give you some flexibility there. So I'm going to say that, I already have, I don't have any client populated, so I want it to download to this location, this Office 365 folder. We'll go ahead and click Next. And this is your option to import client settings. So this would be, again, if you had configuration XML files that you wanted to import. So let's say I already had a config XML file developed for my IT team and deferred channel. I can look to leverage that there. Otherwise, I can just go ahead and click Manually Specify and click Next. And you'll get to this client products page. So for those of you that have done config XML files, we'll see that this is what a config XML file does, except you're actually having to go and write it in Notepad or Word Editor or whatever you're using. Now it's all built into an easy-to-use application wizard. So suite, it's going to ask you what type of suite you want to use. So we'll start there. Drop-down menu, you have Office 365 ProPlus or Office 365 Business. You can also select None, and then you just check Project and Visio. So again, it does work for if you just want to install Project, just Visio, both Project and Visio, just ProPlus, all sorts of different combination of scenarios. It does work for all those. So we're going to say that we want to do Office 365 ProPlus. And then we're going to say you have the ability to uncheck any applications that you want to exclude. So maybe for your, let's say, your HR department, they don't need access. You can uncheck that box there. Maybe you're not going to deploy OneDrive for Business, the next-gen sync client yet. You can uncheck that. Maybe you're still working on things with Skype for Business. You don't want to deploy it yet and add it in later. Again, the ability to do it all there just like you did through your config XML file. The cool one down here that I really like is you see I checked Project and Visio because we're going to install those as well. The cool one I really like is that it allows the support for, if you're aware, that we actually have now supported Project and Visio versions that leverage volume licensing. They're still quick to run, but you're allowed to use your Mac or KMS server, and it has support for that within this wizard. So let's say you are a customer that has Project and Visio 2016, but it was the volume license version. Work with your account team, get that all squared away. And then what we can do is you can actually still deploy Project and Visio, the click-to-run versions that will use your KMS and Mac server, and it's all fully supportable through here. You can do it through the config XML file as well, but it's nice to see it already integrated into this. So we're going to say that it's just going to be a standard Office 365 subscription, and we'll go ahead and click Next. So now we're going to get to the client settings. So if you're envisioning a config XML file, like I know everyone is eagerly, the bottom half is where you get into these parts. So you get into the top half is the first bits you're going to do is the architecture and channels. So those are your first couple of lines, languages, and then the version and properties. So we'll start here. We're going to say we're going to do 32-bit channel. You're going to have 3 different options here: deferred, first release for current, first release for deferred. And you actually should have, you actually have 4 channels. I don't know when this goes live that you'll see first release for current, because there's probably a couple of you out there thinking, wow, current is already fast enough. There's no way there's a first release for that. I would look when this does come out. I would think it would be just the 3 first release for deferred. But it could be out there, and for those of you that really want fast and furious updates, that's the lane to travel down. So we'll go ahead and do deferred channel like we stated in the application settings. I'll go back a slide here. And what we're actually going to do is once I select deferred, I'm going to go ahead and select languages now. So you'll see here that you're able to add every language that you want support for. So there's a couple different options you can do here. What most customers end up doing is just deploying their base known supported languages. So let's say you're just a US-based company, you only need English, that's fine. Let's say you're a company that's based out of the US and maybe overseas in France, or you might have an office in Spain. So you want to include English and Spanish, or maybe English and French. We recommend, if you're using this wizard here and through the config XML file as well, Only install the languages that users are actually going to be needing. You don't want to be adding extra time, or excuse me, extra size onto packages that you don't need. So we're going to just go ahead and say we're going to add Spanish to that as well. And then we go ahead and click add, or excuse me, OK there. So it's going to go ahead and install English as the default, and then include the Spanish language pack as well. Then from this drop-down menu, you're going to see a list of a ton of versions. So this is where it can be a little bit confusing, because if you're not aware of what version is the latest current, it is going to be the top one, but you can actually go and look at these versions, go and look at the TechNet changelog of what versions were released, and you can identify, okay, let's say 2063 had the features that we wanted to make sure we had a minimum of, so we can just go with 2063 for now because we know it's also supported. In the most cases, you'll probably deploy the latest version, but for instance, you might have done all your testing on 2063. That's what you want to first deploy until you could validate the next version. Properties, these are at the very end of your XML file. Your auto-accept a EULA, pin icons, a taskbar, which is available in Windows 7 or 8, auto-activate, which it actually attempts to auto-activate automatically, and then this other one for shared computer activation. So I won't dig into shared computer activation a whole lot, but this will just do that simple registry tag that allows it to handle multiple users without charging them one of their 5 activations. So the cool thing is if you already have like a device collection of all your shared machines or lab machines, check this for shared computer activation, deploy this out to that device collection of your shared machines, and you're good to go already. It's that simple. So we'll go ahead and click Next, and we'll get into the deployment options. So do you want to deploy the application now, or do you want to deploy it later? If you click you want to deploy it later, it's just going to take you straight to the summary. We're going to go ahead and click Yes just to expand out what all the options you'll see are. And this is a pretty familiar wizard that you'll see when you're deploying applications, whatever it is, through Config Manager. So you'll have your collection, so you want to select your device collection. So you might have just a general one like I have here, which is ProPlus client. You could even have your overall end user clients. Some organizations are very detailed and will have business group clients and device collections. So you just have to work with this depending on what your organization is like. Have the checkbox for automatically distribute content for dependencies. Go ahead and click Next. You're going to get your content options, so you're going to want to go ahead and select your distribution point, or more likely points. You'll see here, since this is just an example, I only have the one distribution point. But if, for instance, if you have additional distribution points you want to deploy to, each time you deploy or create this installation wizard, you have the option to add additional distribution points. Then you'll get your deployment settings. Again, this is when you deploy out any application in Config Manager, you see these settings. So whether you want it to be install, uninstall, which in this case we do install, and the purpose, or whether you want to have a mandatory required, or you want it to be just available in the Software Center. And again, this is going to be an internal decision whether you want required or available. Then you have the couple options there. So send wake-up packets, pre-develop software to the user, or pre-deploy, software to the user's primary device. Allow clients on a metered connection, et cetera. These are all things, again, you've seen before. Scheduling page is going to look similar as well. So if you want to do a scheduled-based deployment, yes?
Is there any way to integrate the Office Scrub scripts in with this?
As far as with this wizard itself, no, there is not a way to integrate it with the wizard itself. It's still got to be deployed. You can package it all up, but as far as actually getting it integrated into this, yeah, there's no integration yet. Again, this isn't technical preview, so you can always hope for it. That's good feedback. We will take it back because, no. Okay, so it won't be there. I just got confirmed from Brian. That's a good question, though, because it does come up quite a bit. So again, you'll see your typical scheduling thing, your installation deadline, whether you want to make it available as soon as possible, or maybe you decide that you're going to deploy in a week and you want to schedule it. Next one is user experience, so display in Software Center and show all notifications, system restart, et cetera. Your alerts, so whether you want to create a deployment alert after so many times, et cetera. These are all things when you deploy applications, whether it be Office or any other application you've seen. And then you get to your summary page. And this is actually where, when I was playing with it in technical preview, it worked all the way up until you hit summary. So, and it's different for different people. Again, it's bugged. Actually, I shouldn't say it's bugged. It does have potential to have bugs or little glitches. So if you're playing with it in technical preview, I definitely recommend going through this and getting as far as it will let you go through, which now I think it should be able to go pretty far because, again, I got all the way up to summary. Another gentleman that we worked with, he was actually able to do everything and never had any issues. So maybe it's just the luck of the draw. But I would recommend going through here and playing through it, especially the first couple steps. These things you know from deploying applications, but seeing what customizations you could do, maybe how you want to create these different types of packages, what you're going to want to have application exclusions, and just getting familiar with actually using the deployment wizard instead of going back and building those config XML files. So updating Office 365 clients using config-man. So again, another false hope demo. Yes? Is
that created as an application or as a package?
As an application. So the question was, is it created as an application or a package? It's created as an application, sorry. Yes?
The scheduling, the time that's set to start, is that the start of the install, or is that the start of the process that checks the folder, pulls down the bit difference, and then upon completion does that?
So the question was, the scheduling, is that based on the first install, or when it starts to do the differential compression and all that? It's going to be the first install, just like any other application. Once you set that schedule of when you want it to do, it will either start the initial install. And as far as for updating, updates are always going to be based on the scheduled task, or unless you define it otherwise, which would be like if you disabled it and wanted to manually control it. But updates are always going to be based on that scheduled task that runs like between 3 and 7 a.m. for users that never like to log off, and users that actually do shut down their machine. Once they, on first launch, it will always check wherever your update path is set to, whether it's a CDN or a local folder or a distribution point. It will go and check those. And a lot of times, it will even check it, and it could have updates downloaded before a user even gets Word loaded. So it's pretty quick. And if you have updates waiting to be applied, and that scheduled task catches a user, let's say they have their machine turned off, or if they don't, that scheduled task, if you have updates ready to apply, it will kick it off for that user, so it's an enforcement. So one of the scenarios is, like, say a user never wants to click apply updates, and they restart their machine, or as you as an IT admin do a monthly restart. On first boot, as soon as it boots back up, the PC, it's going to apply those updates, and more often than not, I've seen those updates are actually applied before an application even launches. By the time the profile loads and all that, so it's pretty quick. So this is going to be a much shorter demo, but this is what you'll see for all of the updates available. It's quite a lot you'll see here, especially when you download all of them. So I will let you know that when you go ahead and download all the software updates, it's Config Manager hasn't changed. It's a little bit slow sometimes and likes to be pokey. So when you do download all these software updates, make sure you're not expecting to download them all in 10 minutes and start getting them deployed. When you do that, sync to catch what's out there. But you'll see here what I was talking about is the naming convention. You have current channel 32-bit edition. It also will let you know if you have an update out there, and if it's deployed already, it will let you know if it's installed, the percent compliant, etc., downloaded and deployed. Some of those things, again, will be fine-tuned and tinkered as we continue to release functionality improvements. So what you'll do is you'll right-click one of those updates. And when you first select it, you'll see this detail here. You'll see the severity, bulletin ID, article ID, date release, etc., superseded, expired. And then when you right-click it, we're going to go ahead and select our properties. And that's where you're going to get your supersedence information in this familiar box when you've downloaded updates before. So you'll see article ID, date revised, description, and what it is, all that types of good stuff. You can go over here to the supersedence information. You can go over here to the supersedence information and play with some of that if you want to do an updated package, if you want to do a replacement, etc. Now let's say you're ready to go ahead and deploy. So you'll go ahead and right-click, you'll download it, and then when you're ready to deploy it out, you'll select that deploy button. So when we hit deploy, skip that one, you're going to get this wizard. So the download, or this is when you download it. So when you right-click and do download, this is your download software update wizard. First thing you're going to be able to do is create a new deployment package if you want. So this is going to be a naming convention that you want to follow. You can have your package source. And then in the next page, you're going to be able to select your distribution points that it's going to go to. So again, depending on how many you have, I just have one here because it's a basic lab. Distribution settings is the next page. So distribution priority, some familiar settings that you've played with before in ConfigMan. Download location, so download software updates from the internet, or do you want to download software updates from a location on my network? So this could be, a local path. I think in most cases we'd see users using download software updates from the internet, which is just going to the Microsoft CDN. So as soon as they get released there, it'll download it from the CDN. Click next. have your language selection. So this is important. So every language that you support in that build or that channel, you need to make sure you have the tick box selected here. So if in deferred channel, in my case, I had English and Spanish, so I need to make sure I have English and Spanish checked here. It is not automated, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it's something that you can maybe look through in the future that we would be able to have these checkboxes preoccupied. That's a bit of an engineering workflow on the background. So I would still, going forward, I expect you're going to have to identify what languages you need to download here. So whether you want to make sure you have a little bit of a list of what you need in each channel. And again, it can get a little bit more difficult if you're a global customer that has 30 languages out of the 50 or something like that. But each time you go through here, you want to make sure that you download the latest language packs, include the latest language packs, for your deployment. Click Next, you get to a summary. Click Next, and you're going to get your progress and your completion report. So, okay, we're all good, so we go ahead and click Close. And then you can go ahead and deploy it out into your distribution points, and it's going to distribute that content as you saw here. It's actually going to distribute it out, and it'll be up on your distribution point. ConfigMan will talk to your clients, like we talked about in the WSUS roadmap there. So it will talk to it. It will tell them either via the scheduled task or ConfigMan, hey, go to this distribution point, download the latest update. And then from that point on, depending on how you enforce updates, it's up to you as an organization, whether you just let users click apply updates, whether you wait for a scheduled task to grab it, or whether you want to manually force updates. So availability and roadmap. This is kind of the last couple of slides we have here. So we look at CM 1602. We had the client's updates via software update management workflow, which we talked about. 1606, we introduced inventory capabilities. We had the Office 365 client update management, and then we had integration with automatic deployment rules. Today we're at 1610, which has the Office 365 client management dashboard that we showed. Future versions of SCCM, Config Manager. So these are some of the things that we're working on. Office 365 client deployment wizard, as you saw. Improved and integrated reporting. Second install, so once you have that first initial install, being able to manage those locations, manage that install instead of rather having to go and redo that wizard and remove an application or something like that. Being able to do a second install and say, okay, we're ready to add back on Skype for Business or such. Just an easier, more simplified wizard. Peer-to-peer integration and delivery orchestration. So again, these things are future versions of ConfigMan. I'm not saying they're coming out in 1702, so don't jump on me for that. But they are being worked on. If they're up here, it means that they are scheduled to be, at least worked on and tested. And again, with each of these things too, what we've currently released, and it's part of in line with almost Office 365 as an evergreen service. Once we release features and functionalities, those continue to receive improvements as well. So as we introduced that software wizard, the deployment wizard, once it fully goes public, whenever that will be, don't expect it to just sit there and be as is. It's going to continue to receive improvements. People are going to give feedback on it and how to improve it. We're going to take that. We're going to improve the functionality on the back end. So these are just some of the things that are currently slated. We're currently working on continuing to improve what's currently out there, what's coming. So there's a lot of exciting things to look forward to as far as the better together story of ConfigMan and 365 ProPlus. So I went ahead and left about 15 minutes, hopefully, a little over 15 minutes. If there's anyone that has questions, I know we kind of went through that at a higher level, at a 200 level, because I didn't want to deep dive, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. If you don't have any questions, thank you for attending the session, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday and your weekend. Okay.
Total self-service
Yep.
install. I can still adjust that with these tools, or do I have to do the reverse that?
So the question was, if a user does a portal install, can you still manage it through Config Manager? And the answer is no. So the portal install itself is the very, very most standardized package. There's a way that you could get in there and edit registries and change things around. But I would recommend, depending on how many users you already have installed from the portal, I would look at doing a redistribution. Because what you need to do is just go and update the properties on the back end in the registry. So you could look at doing that as much as, or how much Microsoft is going to be thrilled to hear that you're going in and hacking reg items, even if they are supported.
So, if we envision, less than 100, just send an email saying, hey, I'm installing this, switching.
Yeah, what you could actually do is, because I think we were talking yesterday about if you can leverage maintenance windows at all, or off hours. If what you're able to do is, if you just run, what this gentleman talked about earlier is the off scrub tool, you can have it packaged up into ConfigMan, and you can have the, as a sequence, use off scrub to uninstall that version, and then reinstall the new version of Office during a maintenance window. Yeah, it's been for all offices. It's a VBS script that it wasn't very popular because it's brute force. I mean, it's literally a scrub. So there's sometimes unintended consequences. And I don't want to say that like it's gonna, turn your desktop upside down and crash your computer, but it will look to scrub everything Office related that it can. So it's a great tool to use. You can contact Premiere to get the latest version. Right now it's not publicly available as far as released on a public site. But if you contact Premiere, they'll be able to give you the tool. And yeah, I would look to package off scrub, or you can even do just a simple setup call the uninstall command. But usually off scrub is a surefire way that you're going to clean up everything in the background and then get a fresh install layer down there. Yes? It's on Git, yeah. So GitHub, since we're not officially, it's not part of Microsoft, we do work with the GitHub scripters. We have a partnership with them. So it is out there now, but if you want to obtain the official copy, you technically have to go through Premiere. We are looking to get it published out there so you don't have to go through Premiere, but that's what our recommendation has to be. You can obviously use the GitHub script, and again, we are working with them, so it's not like they're off. It's just some random people doing it on their own, but yeah. Yes?
For large deployments of workstations, we were trying to streamline the imaging process by actually having Office install on the image.
Yeah.
Is there some kind of sysprepping stuff that we need to do specific to the Office when we try and install it? Or where's the documentation for that? How do we do that?
So the question was around getting ProPlus pre-installed on the image and making sure you have everything set up and ready to go. Pretty much so once that user logs into that computer, they're good to go. If you go on the ProPlus TechNet page, there is a full article that's really, really well detailed on how to incorporate it as part of a system image. It'll tell you all the tips and tricks, because the biggest one is whoever's creating your image, if they accidentally activate Office, every person that receives that image is going to activate under that person. So they're never going to be able to use Office because everyone else is using their version of Office. But so that TechNet page is very, very well detailed in the steps that you need to do. The other thing that you'll need to do if you're going to be managing with Config Manager is when you install it, make sure either through GPO or through the XML you enable that COM object, because that's not going to call it out specifically in there. But if you want to use Config Manager to do it, you'll have to enable it. So if you're installing with the XML, you can just make sure you have its Office COM object enabled equals true. Or if you use GPOs in your environment, you can just set the GPO for it. Or in most cases, customers actually do both. GPO takes precedence over Config XML, but a double layer is always good. So follow that guidance on there on what to do, and it even gives you a way to, if you're having some issues, how to test it. If you're having troubles when it first installs or something like that. There's some good testing things on there as well. And the other thing for ConfigMan to get it ready, you're going to have to make sure that you enable that Office COM object. Yep. Any other questions?
So in the old XML way of doing things, you set up the update location.
Yes.
What actually is triggering the client to look at that location, and how easy is it to change that location if needed?
Okay, so the question was when you're using the config XML files, and just in general, what triggers the client to actually update, and then if you can change that update path location. So the first answer for what actually triggers it is that scheduled task. If you go and look at your scheduled tasks on your machine, you'll see the Office ProPlus one. And what it does is it runs every Sunday, Tuesday, Friday, I want to say. And then in between the hours of 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock a.m. So again, it's meant to catch people that excuse me, the 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock a.m. one is meant to catch people that don't restart, or excuse me, shut down. And then also at first boot up, that scheduled task is going to go and look and try and apply updates as well. So it covers both situations. That scheduled task is a little feisty. If you try and change it every time you update Office ProPlus, it's going to reset. So let it work on default, because and I'm not just saying this as a ProPlus guy, it works great the way that it is designed. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's not going to work the way that I want. It does. It works very well. And you'll notice I've had people, you can disable it and it won't re-enable. unless you do like GPO or something. But if you try and change the intervals of it, every time you update, it will reset itself. But as far as changing the update path, what you can do is you can re-push out an XML file to it. You can re-push out the call setup.exe, configure, and an XML file. And as long as you don't have, the important part of that is you need to make sure that everything in that XML file is the same except for that update path. Because if there's, let's say, an additional application or something like that, if your original install excluded an app and you forgot to exclude that again, it will add that application back in. But you can change that, the update path that way, or you can actually change the update path via GPO. The tricky part with GPO, though, is that depending on how you have your GPOs applied to your OUs and things like that, you might not catch everyone. So if you rerun the config XML file with just that update path change, that's what I've had most customers do. It will take about 5 minutes to 10 minutes to run, but it's not actually really doing anything other than going through line by line and making sure that there's no changes. So that's why I say just be careful that you take pretty much your old XML that you ran to install it, the new one you want with the update path, make sure everything is the same except for that update path location, and it will update it. You could even go and hack the registry. Well, not actually, it's not even really a hack. You can go and change it via the registry, which is just what the GPO does as well. I would recommend doing it the GPO if possible, if you have a good kind of organizational unit that you're able to apply to it all. But in this day and age with AD the way that it is, most companies, once they grow in size, it's not really that practical to be able to catch every single client and change the update path that way. So you have a couple different options as far as that goes, either pushing through the XML or changing it via the GPO.
Thank you. So changing the XML, you could then take your local DFS location and change it to the cloud location?
Yes, yeah. So in that case, all you would do is if it's set to your DFS, you would just remove the update path from it, and then it would just go straight to the CDN. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's actually pretty. Sometimes customers and organizations will patch locally to begin with, and test out their network constraints and things like that, and figure out, okay, when can we leverage maintenance windows to do updates, and then they'll change it over to the CDN. Yeah, you can just re-push out in an XML. Mm-hmm. Yes.
You still see some clients that, after running updates, they get like prompts in Office that says the Office needs to be updated. We have updates turned off, but it seems to be kicking off when you kick off the update. So to apply an update, it doesn't get fully applied.
Okay, so the question was, you're seeing some users that are getting prompts that updates need to be applied after they applied them?
After tasks ran to apply the update, it seemed to be moving, and they applied other OS updates and everything else too.
Mm-hmm.
We still see, the Office didn't seem to get everything.
Yeah, I haven't come across that a whole lot. I've seen it in a couple cases when what pretty much happens is when you apply the updates, it's not that it bugs out. And this is in very few cases because I've ran through thousands of lab scenarios. You'll still see that highlighted yellow box that says when you go in Office account, it might say updates are waiting to be applied, but you try and click on them and you can't actually apply anything. So next time you see that situation, when you click on it, does it still apply updates again? Do you know? Oh, so okay, so it seems like, yeah, I haven't heard of that scenario where they're actually only receiving partial upgrades. So that's something that's a little bit interesting. If you keep having that issue, reach out to someone on your account, your Microsoft account team, and just let them know that that's potentially a bug or something within your environment. I can't see it being something within your environment, but it could potentially be a bug. So if you start seeing that on wide scale, you can get a Premier ticket opened as well. And if it's a bug, then it would be no cost, and you'd be able to just get it logged. But yeah, keep an eye on that, and if you keep getting that, that's a little bit, I haven't honestly heard of that situation. So I would just try and replicate it, and if you can keep replicating it and having issues, file a bug report. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for sticking it out.